Hi everyone, this is Dr. Michael Leahy from the Esri Canada Education and Research Group. Last week we posted a video that gave you detailed steps for creating virtual machines in Azure that are pre-configured with ArcGIS desktop software. In this video I want to discuss a little more detail about sizing of virtual machines in Azure, estimating costs, and to introduce a simplified way to launch images using Azure Resource Manager templates. To make this easy for you, we have pre-configured a set of sample templates in a repository in GitHub. If you're watching this video on YouTube, you'll find the link to the repository in the details below. When you open the GitHub repository, you'll find the sample templates along with a README file that describes the templates and considerations about sizing and cost estimation. When you use these templates in Azure, you will need to provide some basic details needed to create your virtual machine. This includes login credentials, a hostname prefix, a name to identify the machine in your Azure account, the size of the VM, a schedule for daily shutdown, and an email to contact prior to each shutdown. The most significant decision to make here is the size of your virtual machine. You'll want to choose a size that is appropriate for the kinds of tasks you need to perform while ensuring that you're able to work within the budget you have available. It's worth becoming familiar with the hardware system requirements for ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro and the different Windows virtual machine sizes available in Azure. To get reasonable performance with ArcGIS desktop software on a virtual machine, you'll likely want to choose a VM that has at least 4 CPU cores and 16 gigabytes of RAM. If you'll be performing any 3D mapping in ArcGIS Pro, you'll also need to choose a machine that has at least one GPU available for display graphics. For this, you need to select one of the NV series of VMs in Azure. Each VM size has associated pay-as-you-go rates for each hosting region in Azure. You'll want to be sure you know your budget and plan your VM size and the amount of time you use it accordingly. The Azure Pricing Calculator is an effective tool for estimating the cost of a VM for your expected usage. When using this, keep in mind that the ArcGIS desktop image in Azure will deploy a VM with a 128 GB disk image, allocated either as a premium solid-state drive if supported by your chosen VM, or a standard solid-state drive. So that should be included in your cost estimate to ensure it's accurate. For convenience, we have included links to pre-configured monthly pricing estimates for each of the VM templates in this repository for Canada, Central, and East US hosting regions. These include estimates that are set up to reflect usage rates of about 50 hours per month, or about 10 to 11 hours per week, 100 hours per month, and 720 hours, more or less 30 days continuous use with no automatic shutdown policy. Note the links to these estimates will display US dollars by default, so you'll want to be sure if you're using a Canadian account that you change the currency to Canadian dollars at the bottom of the estimate. Finally, to minimize usage costs, in addition to keeping the auto shutdown policy enabled, you may at any time choose to shut down your virtual machine to stop pay-as-you-go billing for its resources. To do this, it's not sufficient to shut down the Windows OS from the Start menu. You must shut down the VM itself through the Azure portal. At any time, you can access the VM in your account and start it up again to continue working with it. In this repository, you'll find 4 pre-configured templates. All of them are identical except they are pre-configured with different default VM sizes. To use a template to launch a new VM in Azure, you can simply click the Deploy to Azure link and follow the prompts on the next page. You can get details on the VM sizes in these templates by following the links to the documentation. If you want to choose a different VM size, you would copy the identifier displayed in the documentation here and enter it into the VM size parameter for the template. This first image uses a standard D4 version 3 VM, which offers 4 CPU cores and 16 gigabytes of RAM, though it has no GPU. So it's good for ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro as long as you're only using it for 2D mapping. The next template uses a standard NV6 VM size, which provides 6 CPU cores, 56 gigabytes of RAM, and 1 GPU with 8 gigabytes of GPU memory. This will certainly work well for ArcMap and can also enable you to use ArcGIS Pro's 3D mapping capabilities. Note that this VM class is not available in Canadian regions in Azure. If you need to use this type of VM, you'll need to be sure that you choose to host it in a US region. If you are considering an NV series VM, there is currently a series of NV machines that are offered at promotional rates. These have the same specifications as the non-promotional versions, but a lower hourly cost. This third template will use the NV6 promo VM if it's available, and has a 40% discount, though it's still approximately 3 times the cost of the standard non-GPU machine noted in the first template. To get a sense of what it would cost to use this VM, you can follow the link to the pricing estimate that's prepared here. Remember that we need to change the currency to Canadian dollars if we're using a Canadian account. Here you can see that for 100 hours of use, this VM will cost 122 Canadian based on its hourly rate. Plus there's a monthly cost associated with the 128 gigabyte disk, bringing the monthly total to about 135 if you use this VM for about 20 to 22 hours per week. This last template in the repository is useful if you have a tight budget for your Azure account. It uses a VM with a size that's configured with 4 CPU cores and 16 gigabytes of RAM. However, the full 4 CPU capacity is only available for use in short bursts, depending on the amount of time that your VM remains idle below a baseline of about 90% of one CPU. This option works if you need ArcGIS desktop software but don't plan to run CPU-intensive processes and don't need to use 3D mapping in ArcGIS Pro since there's also no GPU. Let's try launching the NV6 promo template by clicking the corresponding Deploy to Azure link. On the next page, you'll be prompted first to select your subscription, then select or create a resource group that will store your VM and its associated resources. Note in the settings that the standard NV6 promo VM size is already specified for us. You can override this with a different VM size identifier if you prefer. As noted, the NV series VMs are not available in Canada, so you'll need to change this to a US region that has the NV machines available. Next, we provide our desired login credentials and a DNS prefix that must be unique within the selected hosting region in order to give us a fully qualified domain name that we can use to access the VM. We can specify a preferred time for an auto shutdown policy and need to provide an email address that will receive notifications when a shutdown event is going to occur. After accepting the terms, click the Purchase button. Within a few minutes, you'll have a new virtual machine created for you in the resource group that you specified. When you open the VM in Azure, you can find its IP address or the host name created for you with the DNS prefix that you specified. You can use either of those to connect to the VM from a remote desktop client. The default port for connecting is 3389, and you'll need to include the IP address or the host name with a backslash before your username when you log in. Provide the password that you specified when you completed the template. Once you access this VM, with the GPU available for graphics display, you can open up ArcGIS Pro and begin working with 3D scenes. Of course, it'll work great for 2D mapping in ArcGIS Pro as well as ArcMap. Remember, when you're finished working with your VM, you can manage your overall costs better by remembering to shut down the machine in Azure. I hope you find this video and the templates provided useful. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me or send your questions to highered@esri.ca.